What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about some good news about Ukraine. So today, I really want to take a look at this because, to be honest, here in the United States, we almost never talk about the Russia Ukraine war anymore. It's like everybody just moved on to the next thing. And everybody kind of stopped caring about this. At least here in the US, that is. And you also don't really hear any updates about what is happening in Ukraine from the news here either. So today, I really want to check out this video here by TLDR News and learn about what is happening in Ukraine and what sounds like some good news, actually, for Ukraine that I had absolutely no idea about. So let's take a look.
So, as we see it, there are at least three reasons to think that things are looking up for Ukraine at the moment. The first and most obvious is that, thanks to Viktor Orban's disastrous performance at the Hungarian election earlier this month, Ukraine will now receive a long awaited €90 billion loan from the EU.
Oh, okay. See, this is the perfect example of like, we don't hear anything about this here in the United States. Like, we don't we don't know that there's like a Hungarian election or that unlocked like funding for Ukraine or this 90 billion euros or I feel like there's a lot of stuff happening in Europe that we just don't hear about from our news or we don't talk about it. We don't bother to learn about it like on the internet. You can just go online and at least that's what I'm trying to do here today, hopefully, because this really is like eye opening to me that there's a lot of stuff happening that's very important outside of the US that we just don't know about.
For context, since the withdrawal of US aid last year, Ukraine's finances have been looking pretty dicey.
That's another thing right there. Ever since Donald Trump was elected again, he cut like most of the funding from the US towards Ukraine, right? And I feel like ever since that, it's not really talked about much here in the US either. And the US government certainly doesn't talk about Ukraine and the news. And yeah, that definitely has something to do with it. And also, I think Ukraine, like for a lot of us here in the US, we feel like, oh, that's so far away. That's on the other side of the world. That's you know what that so that doesn't really matter. Like which is such a like we feel like we're so far away, like it that we don't think about it. Which is a really really bad mindset. Really bad. Kind of embarrassing, really. Because these are really important things.
And Kyiv was due to essentially run out of cash sometime this year. The EU's original plan to plug the gap was to use the roughly €200 billion of frozen Russian assets sitting in Europe depositories, either by just giving it to Ukraine or using it as collateral for a new loan.
Wait, what? What? I never heard about that either. Is that a thing? This is Russian assets, like Russia's money, that's locked up in Europe. Because Europe doesn't want to give it to Russia and help them, obviously. But you also are going to take Russia's money and give it to Ukraine? Can you do that? That would be kind of awesome. It'd be like using Russia's own money against them, which would be pretty cool. Is that can you do that?
But this plan fell apart after member states were essentially unable to agree on a burden sharing mechanism in the event of legal action from Moscow. This meant the EU
Okay.
had to move to Plan B, which was to finance another 90 billion euros in aid via joint debt.
Oh my god. So for Ukraine, this war has obviously dragged on. It's been years now. And getting money and funding to keep going, to keep the war going, and the military, all the funding that requires, that's really difficult. That seems like one of Ukraine's biggest obstacles, really. And the U.S. was helping with that for a while, which was cool. And now, obviously, we pretty much stopped. And it sounds like Europe is really doing your part to keep trying to help Ukraine, and at least, if not donating money, like it sounds like you're offering loans or debt, uh, 90 billion euros. So that's good. But man, it must be tough, especially since how long this kind of thing goes on for.
In other words, by borrowing the money at the EU level instead of at the national level, and then basically giving that money on to Ukraine. Unfortunately for Ukraine, this loan was essentially vetoed by Hungary under its outgoing Prime Minister Viktor Orban, despite the fact, it should be said, that Hungary has already secured an exemption, meaning it wouldn't be involved in paying back any of the joint debt.
Oh my god. So, this Hungarian election, which most Americans have no idea that even happened, was actually a huge deal because Hungary was holding this up, really screwing Ukraine. And now that hurdle is gone.
However, as you probably already know, Orban suffered a resounding defeat at the Hungarian election earlier this month, and his successor, Peter Magyar, has since confirmed he will withdraw Hungary's veto.
Wow.
This will provide immediate relief and stave off an acute crisis. But perhaps more significantly, if this means joint debt becomes the European default for financing further aid, it will provide Ukraine with a reliable source of long-term funding, given the EU has a lot more so-called fiscal space, i.e. it can borrow a lot more money than any member state.
So, this is the first bit of good news for Ukraine. They had a big funding problem. And now a lot of those obstacles are gone, and Ukraine has a long-term solution for getting loans or taking out debt from the EU, basically. So that's good news for Ukraine.
Anyway, the second reason to be optimistic is that advances in Ukrainian drone technology seems to have given Ukraine the upper hand on the battlefield.
Oh.
There have been sort of three developments on this front. The first is the emergence of semi-autonomous drones, which can perform at least some functions without human operators.
Oh, this is scary. Like, I'm glad Ukraine has this. So Ukraine doesn't just purchase drones, they actually have developed this, like a lot of this drone military technology. That's amazing, especially to do that during wartime. So Ukraine is developing and has all these killer drones, which I'm sure use AI, and like they just said, you don't even need a physical person to pilot them anymore or be in danger. It's great and it's terrifying at the same time, because this is what modern war looks like, where it used to be people with guns on a battlefield. Now it's flying death machines going around the skies, like drone bombing people. It's scary, but it is the reality.
These drones possess two main advantages. First, they're less susceptible to electronic jamming, which disrupts the communication link between pilot and drone. And second, they obviously don't need a human operator, which is especially convenient for Ukraine given their manpower constraints.
What do you mean they don't need a human operator? Doesn't somebody have to tell the drone what its mission is, or where to go? Or maybe you do that and then there's no human with a remote control needed. Is that what they mean? Surely there's not just drones flying around making AI calculated decisions, or I don't know. Maybe.
Ukraine first deployed semi-autonomous drones last year, but they've gradually become more autonomous since, and production has really ramped up in the past couple of months, which is one of the
Oh,
big
wow.
reasons the Russians are struggling to make progress on the front lines.
Ukraine must be like particularly good at that. Because Russia's doing everything they can to have this drone technology. I'm sure they're doing everything they can to, like, Russia would want these drones, but it's like a Ukraine thing. So, if it is going to be this terrifying flying killing machine, I'm glad that it's Ukraine that has it.
The second development is Ukraine's improved long-range strike capabilities. This has allowed Ukraine to put pressure on Russian logistics, but also allowed Ukraine to hit Russian energy facilities, including export hubs and refineries.
Oh, wow. Because for the longest time here in the US, when they were covering this war, it was really mostly talking about how Russia is defeating Ukraine and invading Ukraine and just killing Ukraine now it's like flipped. Ukraine is like striking Russia and destroying energy sources and like you Russia is probably seriously regretting this. It sounds like Ukraine is like kicking Russia's ass in a way. So, this is amazing. Like, what? More Americans should know about this.
According to Reuters, by the end of March, Ukraine had taken out about 40% of Russia's crude oil export capacity. And in April, Russia was apparently forced to cut production by about 300,000 to 400,000 barrels per day, the sharpest monthly decline to Russian output in the 6 years since the pandemic.
Ukraine has made a very serious damage to Russia's energy capabilities. That's amazing.
This is yet more bad news for the Kremlin's finances, which looked genuinely disastrous at the start of this year. In just January and February, for instance, Russia's GDP apparently shrank by 1.8%, and the budget deficit came in at 4.5 trillion rubles, not far off the 3.8 trillion ruble gap originally projected for the entire year.
Wow.
Although Putin will probably be bailed out if the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and oil and gas prices remain elevated.
So, in a roundabout way, the United States is helping Russia. Plus, like, even if you could say that's indirect, but like Trump has directly complimented and like Russia, or at least not condemned Russia nearly enough. And wow, this is like embarrassing for the US. Okay.
The third drone-related development is the emergence of cost-effective interceptors. Faced with a shortage of Western air defense systems, Ukraine has developed a number of interceptor drones that are now remarkably effective and impressively cheap.
Because of this war, has Ukraine just become like the drone capital of the world? Like, is this just their expertise? This is amazing.
They currently account for roughly 70% of all drone interceptors around Ukrainian cities and cost as little as $2,000 per unit. And this takes us nicely onto our third and final reason that things are
Wow.
looking up for Ukraine. There's been a sudden flurry of interest in Ukraine's military kit. A lot of this has to do with the war in Iran, which has made people realise that Western, and specifically American, military tech is good, but not at all cost effective. After all, interceptors for the US-made Patriot system, which is very popular with America's traditional allies, cost about $4 million a pop.
Somehow the United States, we're getting dragged into this video because somehow we have managed to screw things up again. I thought this was just going to be like an update on Ukraine, which it is. But of course, like, it's funny because the United States is involved in this, but even here in the US, we don't really hear about this side of things. So this is good. Because this is not, this is bad for the United States, this news. Because military equipment, technology, that's supposed to be our thing. But it sounds like a lot of countries are more interested in purchasing these things from Ukraine. Is that right?
And the US only makes a few hundred each year. This isn't a bad deal when you're defending against, say, a ballistic missile, but it's a terrible deal when you're defending against a Shahed drone, which, at the latest estimate, costs Iran just $7,000 per unit.
I see.
Ukraine is basically the only country that currently mass produces battle-tested and cost-effective alternatives. This is why Gulf nations have been queuing up, and Zelensky has recently signed security partnerships with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates.
I had no idea about the Ukraine is becoming like this military powerhouse and manufacturing things that the US can't even do. I had no idea about this.
Which will presumably involve cooperation on drone manufacturing and provide a welcome cash injection for Ukraine's defence industry.
Yeah.
We've also seen a flurry of similar deals with European countries. In February, 4 Ukrainian firms launched joint ventures with firms from Denmark, Finland, and Latvia. And earlier this month, Germany and Ukraine announced a massive new defence package, which involved cooperation on drone manufacturing, with Italy discussing
Wow.
a similar deal at the moment. This suggests Europe no longer sees Ukraine as a supplicant, but as a valuable and equal security partner.
Exactly. Like, there were Americans who were really mad at Ukraine, I remember, because Ukraine was like getting a lot of funding and money. And it's like, oh, they're just take. But this video shows a totally different side to where Ukraine is actually providing a really valuable military resource.
Which is probably a more sustainable dynamic. As a final thing, the fact that Ukraine is in a stronger position bodes well for future negotiations, both because it gives Ukraine more leverage, but also because, more fundamentally, it might finally convince Putin to take negotiations seriously, especially if Trump loses interest. Keeping up to date.
Oh my God. Ukraine is in such a better position than I knew. I had no idea that Ukraine was doing this well. Why? This is what I mean. This is the kind of stuff we just don't hear about here in the US. Maybe because it doesn't go along with our narratives, or it doesn't make us look good, or because we're not really supporting Ukraine anymore. And now Ukraine is like starting to do better than ever by the sound of it. And so it's kind of embarrassing for us. And maybe that has something to do with it, or maybe Americans are just not interested in stuff like this, which is really sad. But I'm very glad I took a look at this because this is so important and like such big news happening that I'm so glad I'm aware of now. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on all this stuff happening in Ukraine. That'd be cool to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.